He just pulled his wife away from the children, even shouted, "You will suffer," and started shooting, but he didn't shoot at his wife, he shot at the children. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminality Patrol. Well, what happened in Prusis in Lower Silesia, as people commonly say, is beyond human comprehension, an unimaginable tragedy. Also, when we find out that the perpetrator of the tragedy is a man in uniform, we simply start to feel afraid. We also wonder why this happened. We often resort to a kind of mental shortcut, thinking that this person must have had something wrong with his head. We don't try to explain it, and yet situations like this are not, of course, the end result of such cases. It's not a decision made suddenly. It's usually a process that takes a longer time, and in my opinion, this process or what's happening can be noticed and can be prevented. But you just have to notice it. I invite you to watch the next episode.
Astronarium.pl.com, Astronarium TVP. For our supporters, we have a new episode of the audio podcast. You will find the link to it in the description below the video. We warmly greet all the patrons of the Criminality Patrol channel. At the highest tiers, we are supported by Mona Monika, Piotr Lipcza, Anna Maria KRK, Kinga Struska, Wira, and Dorota Kowalówka. Thank you very much. To support us, click the link in the video description below.
Adam was an officer of the prison service. Well, he had already worked for quite a long time, 17 years, but in the prison service he was quite exceptional because he worked in the intervention group. That's what it's called, so it's a bit like comparing them to the old anti-terror units or counter-terrorism officers, as the police call them now. So they go in where other officers are normally afraid to go, where there's risk, where you could simply lose your life or get seriously hurt. Yes, Adam would go into exactly those kinds of situations, marked by high risk and the possibility that something could simply happen to him. But even in that intervention group, Adam was someone special because he was the commander of that group. When you look at a photo of that group, you see strong, determined guys, athletic, just as they should be. They should also inspire respect, a certain awe and fear among the people they intervene against. And after all, they intervene every day among prisoners, so among those who often have no regard for the law. These are murderers, rapists, people suspected of various crimes who respect neither the law nor other people. Adam was in charge of just such an intervention group. That's also because of what they did. They would show up or enter wearing balaclavas, armed and determined. They shout, push people, they throw them to the ground. That's just how the intervention group operates. That's exactly the point, to use their behavior, their kind of aggression, but let's say aggression under control, to neutralize the danger. Often these are very extreme situations because it's either a prison riot or an attack by a madman who wants to kill others. And of course, one of the inmates who goes into such a rage, Adam worked in that kind of atmosphere. So what does such a response team do when they're not taking action? Well, most often they just train. They keep themselves in good shape. They have to be in good physical shape because you never know when there will be a call, when something will happen. So it's possible practically 24 hours a day, both during the day and at night. And that's the nature of the job. So you always have to be on edge in some way. You always have to be ready for action. So there's no such thing as normalcy here. Like starting work at 8, finishing at 4 and going home. It's true we go home, but anything can happen at any moment. On a daily basis, Adam worked on Kleczkowska Street in Kleczkowa. Of course, there's a prison there. He was highly regarded by his superiors because as a commander, he not only led those operations but also went out for training. Other prisons invited him to train other officers in their facilities. So you can see from this that he was really held in very high regard. Adam lived in Prusis on a daily basis. That's a town near Wrocław. He lived together with his wife. Besides, his wife wasn't unfamiliar with Adam's work because she was also a supervisor in another prison. So she knew the specifics of this profession. She simply worked in the prison service. So he lived with his wife. He lived with 2 children, a little 5-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. There was also his mother-in-law, 71 years old, and so all of them together, 5 people in total, lived in that house. However, Adam drank a lot. As his friends and acquaintances say, he could drink large amounts of alcohol. He could hold his liquor. But at the same time, he would start fights. He was aggressive. He could be dangerous. There were quite a lot of those fights. It seems that his wife just had enough of it. She was probably afraid for herself, afraid for the children, and for the home in general because of his aggression, and she decided to divorce him. She actually filed for divorce in court. The first hearing took place in mid-March this year. As you can see, all of this happened very recently. It even seemed that everything was going as expected in this situation. It's going in the right direction, it's on the right track, because, well, they made a certain kind of decision since it's not possible to live together. So in that house in Prusis, the wife and children were supposed to stay. Also the wife's mother. And they were supposed to buy an apartment for him. It seems that they had already bought that apartment. Adam was supposed to move into that apartment, and they had even set a date already. He was supposed to move out, literally, so to speak, just a few days ago, before Easter. But it seems that there was also another reason why his wife wanted to divorce Adam. It wasn't just his issues with alcohol either, but also his tendency to chase other women. It seemed that his business trips, those trainings, of course, they were real, but there was also a time when he was hitting on other women. I guess he didn't have a problem with that. Well, he was a handsome guy. He was attractive and women liked him. So he had no problem picking up women. Well, the prison service is in a way like other circles. It's a kind of closed circle. Sooner or later, of course, his wife had to find out about it, so she probably knew, probably suspected, that there were other women. It also seemed that his colleagues simply covered for him during those trips. So that was also the case. That was the second reason why his wife simply wanted to leave him, because she was fed up with such a man. Obviously, it's an enormous amount of stress. Given what was happening in that house, things must have been bad for a long time. Divorce case. The wife was somehow exhausted physically and mentally. So her friends and also her mother told her to go on a short vacation for a few days. Indeed, it was difficult for her, but she decided to go on such a trip abroad. During that time, her mother was taking care of the children, and it seemed that this would be a kind of escape from everything that was happening. Unfortunately, at that time, this is the end of March this year, Adam is on leave. Unfortunately, as usual, I'd say, he spends that day drinking. So on March 28th, there was yet another reason to have a drink. It was a farewell for his colleague. One of his colleagues was simply retiring. Of course, such a gathering ended with heavy drinking. He came home that day, and then he started causing a scene. And since his wife was also expected back that day, I think that his mother just called her. She told her what was happening at home. She was preparing her for the fact that things were just bad at home. And it really was bad. When his wife showed up at home, the argument just got worse. While being afraid in some way, she decided to call the police. And in all of this, Adam was probably in some kind of drunken stupor. Despite the state he was in, it got through to him that the police would come, that there would be an investigation, that proceedings would begin. It's also possible that what's called a blue card will be issued. So a blue card is something that indicates abuse in the family that's been going on for a long time. It looks like he got scared of that in some way. Maybe he realized that if the police take action like that, it has to reach his superiors. And then they'll start to wonder if he's even fit for the kind of work he's doing. Whether he can be a commander, whether he can take part in such an operation, and most importantly, whether he can have a weapon. Usually situations like this really end there. In the mildest way possible, someone is suspended from their duties for a while, and in extreme situations. It can also end with someone simply being fired from their job, so it could have ended really badly for him. It's not out of the question that this is exactly how he was thinking. He went to the room. Adam had a weapon. He had a pistol. It was his private weapon. Security officers, prison service officers, they get permission to carry weapons. Obviously they're at risk, they could be in danger, so there's no problem with that here, so that they can get such a weapon, especially since the person is trained after all, who is very skilled with weapons. So Adam had no problems getting a permit for such a weapon. At that moment he went to his room and he came back with a pistol. So all of this happened on the ground floor of the house. When Adam showed up with a pistol, first he shot his mother-in-law. The woman fell dead. She died on the spot. The rest are his wife and 2 children. They managed to run upstairs, and there they hid in one of the rooms. Adam started looking for them. He actually found them in that room. They were somehow huddled together. They tried to protect themselves together, but that too was fear. Adam, before he fired, simply pulled his wife away from the children. He even shouted, "You will suffer." And he started shooting, but he didn't shoot at his wife. He was shooting at the children, at his 5-year-old daughter, at his 9-year-old son. That 5-year-old girl, that child, also died on the spot. However, the 9-year-old boy survived. He was later taken to the hospital. And the fight for his life began. Well, Adam, after he shot the children, turned the gun on himself. And he also shot himself. And he was lying next to the children. The boy was taken to the hospital. A fight for his life began. Unfortunately, they couldn't save him. At some point, the doctors said that although his heart was still beating, but his brain was no longer functioning. He was brain dead. So a decision had to be made. And here, in my opinion, the boy's mother made a wonderful decision that his organs would be used to save others. Other people, other individuals, they would simply be transplanted. And thanks to that, other people would be saved. That's exactly what happened. In fact, the boy's death was officially declared only 3 days later. So March 31st, it also turned out that Adam survived. He was in serious condition, even very serious. In fact, he still remains in that condition. But he survived. He underwent 2 complicated surgeries. What will happen to him next? How will he function? It looks like he will live. But what will be the consequences of the wounds he has suffered at this moment? Well, of course, it's hard to say. As usual, situations like this put all the higher-ups on alert. And the people who are connected to him, that's what happened in this case. A press conference was called immediately. Questions were answered. It's always important for superiors to know whether what happened was related to his service. And of course, statements like that are always made, well, maybe not always, but in the vast majority of cases, that what happened was not related to his service. That Adam was an exemplary officer, that he regularly underwent all kinds of psychological evaluations, that his behavior did not give any grounds for his superiors to interfere in his personal life in any way. So from the point of view of his superiors, of everything that was happening around him, a family tragedy, the fact that he shot at his family had nothing to do with his service. And in some way, of course, you can accept that, but in my opinion, not entirely. Of course, people were also saying that anyone who needs such help can go to a psychologist at any time. But then others started saying that getting help from a psychologist isn't really a viable option, that someone who just wants to work won't go to a psychologist. They won't talk to them about their own problems because word will get out and that person won't be able to work. Therefore, when they're with a psychologist, officers aren't honest. They don't tell the whole truth. They only say what lets them pass successfully. These kinds of tests. There was also a lot said about mobbing and favoritism. Well, that's usually what people say too. Often these are probably things that aren't entirely true, but it's certainly a fact that the officers are overworked. That theoretically they should be in charge of 40 inmates, but they have twice as many as 80. That because of this, well, they do a lot more stressful work. Of course, such voices have been raised. They always are. So you have to look at them with solid verification. But the fact is that a lot has been said about this among the prison service. But in this context, there is something I've been talking about for many years, especially in situations like these tragic events, about simply moving psychologists outside the prison walls, outside police stations, headquarters. Well, today it's basically like this. If any officer wants to get advice, they basically have to go to their colleague and talk to them about various things. Things we usually just don't talk about because we're ashamed or afraid to say them. We still have what I would call a myth lingering here. The myth of the super officer, the super cop. A man who's running at full speed 24 hours a day, who can jump into action at any moment, and at the same time he's smiling. He has a normal home. He picks up his kids from kindergarten or school, who eats regular meals, who goes on vacations. There's no such thing. It's just a utopia. I know myself because for 10 years while I was still working in the police, I didn't take a vacation because I was always needed. So for 10 years, I basically didn't have a vacation. You just can't go on like that for so long. Sooner or later, some kind of crisis has to happen. A breakdown. because a person is simply just a human being, and you have to be aware of that. In my opinion, psychologists need to be brought outside the walls, outside the headquarters, so that every officer can go to such a psychologist, one that he simply chooses himself, and tell the whole truth about how he feels. Otherwise, situations like this will keep happening because people will be afraid of it. That the information that they're not doing well, that they have certain thoughts, often suicidal, will reach their superiors. And that will be the end of their work. There's also a lot of talk about how aggressive these response units are. And for example, that they use steroids. All of this, of course, is to have good muscle tissue, just to look intimidating. Obviously, steroids also have an impact on the human psyche. The second element is drinking alcohol, that a lot of alcohol is consumed. That alcohol is like a remedy for all kinds of stress, which is related to this service. And there is a lot of that stress. I'm not even mentioning the very fact of being in such an intervention group. But after all, the profession of prison service, it's a very specific profession. There is practically no other profession like this, because even though a person is free, they spend a large part of their life in prison. To put it simply, they just sit there. Well, the only thing that separates a guard from a prisoner is this: after work he can go home. But look at how small the area actually is. After all, a prison isn't a huge facility. How many negative things of all kinds there are. Aggression, thoughts, all sorts of things. Things that I would say create this kind of atmosphere. An atmosphere, well, that's somehow hard to bear. And all those officers, after all, they've been there for many years and they're doomed to it, of course, to all those complaints. You also have to take them with some skepticism, because most often they come from prisoners and they have different motivations. Also, there's the desire for revenge, to get back at a corrections officer, so you have to take that into account as well, and with some solid verification. But certainly, in those statements, in those opinions, there is a lot of truth. There was a now legendary boxing coach in Poland, Felix Stam, and he had his favorite saying that there are no people immune to punches. There are only those who were hit badly. And that really proves true in life. Of course, it can apply to any profession, but a profession like this one, a prison guard or the profession of a police officer, especially because after all, these people are especially exposed to all kinds of things. Stress, it's a bit of a rhetorical question. If Adam had a different profession or if he had a different role in what he was doing, would such a tragedy have happened in his home? It seems not. So somehow you have to connect what he did with what he was doing. Was it something he did every day? No. These situations in the prison system, they happen, I don't want to say often, but every time. These are, I would say, very tragic stories. For example, the story of the prison warden from Sturm who killed an inmate. In the end, I think he wasn't held criminally responsible because it was determined that he was simply insane, and at the moment he killed the inmate, he wasn't aware of what he was doing. In other words, he was found to have a mental illness. Also, just as a side note, that mental illness must have been developing for some time. After all, we made an episode on the channel about the psychologist who was killed, murdered by an inmate in the prison. We also did one about another prison guard who shot at police officers. Do you remember in Siedelce he shot 3 officers back then? So of course cases like this do happen, and in my opinion we just need to draw conclusions from them every time, and there's only one conclusion. A person's mental condition, well, that's something that's not given once and for all, and it can change at any moment. Such a crisis can happen. And of course, Adam did something terrible, something that can't be forgiven on a human level. He shot his 2 children, a 5-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy, Latka. Children who trusted him, who wanted to live. You just can't forgive something like that on a human level. He told his wife, "You will suffer." That was his intention. And I think he succeeded, because it's certainly hard to imagine that the mother of those children could ever function in a normal way. And that's one thing. Secondly, Adam will probably be in prison for the rest of his life. As you may remember, there are new regulations now stating that a life sentence is without parole. So life imprisonment simply means, to put it bluntly, life imprisonment. And if someone gets a life sentence, they stay in prison until the end of their life. There is no chance to get out of it early. Adam might get such a sentence. He is in, I would say, quite a paradoxical situation where he will be guarded by his own colleagues. And as one of the few who committed a crime for the first time, he knows what to expect in prison. And that's all for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.
For our supporters, we have a new audio podcast episode. You can find the link in the description below the video. Warm greetings to all the patrons of the Kryminalny Patrol channel. At the highest support tiers, we are supported by Mona Monika, Piotr Lipcza, Anna Maria KRK, Kinga Struska, Vira, and Dorota Kowalówka. Thank you very much. To support us, click the link in the video description below.